I made a $20 bet with my son. I lost the bet and I had to pay up. Can you admit when you're wrong? Welcome to the Intentional Father Podcast, where us fathers parent our children, not by accident, but with intent. I'm your host, Aaron Stroman. Admit when you're wrong. That's the title of the episode. That's the big idea. Admit when you are wrong. As a father of intentionality, being the intentional father, we have to admit when we are wrong. There's lots of reasons for it. I'm just going to unpack a couple, but the first one is this is a reality check. The reality is we are not perfect beings. We make mistakes. We are inaccurate. We are mistaken. Can you admit it when that happens? We should admit it. And when we do admit it, it lets everyone else around us know that, hey, we're still connected to reality. We're in touch with reality. And it makes us relatable. As a father, you want your kids to be able to relate to you. As a man, you're going to want your peers, your coworkers, your spouse to be able to relate to you. One of the biggest ways to do this is admit when you are wrong. Now, specifically with our children, think of this in the perspective of a child's view of the father. The father is this bigger than life superhero, big, strong, can do anything. When the father can admit that he's wrong, it helps us become human to our kids. Our kids may think that we're bigger than human, but we're not. We are human, so are our children. So when we can admit we're wrong to our kids, they realize like, okay, dad isn't perfect. He's not invincible, but he's humble enough to admit it. And that's where the respect and honor can be built when you're humble enough to admit that you're wrong. Now, not only should we do this, but it also models ownership for our kids. When we can own when we're wrong, we're modeling for our children that they can own it when they are wrong. And that's something that we want our kids to own. In fact, a lot of times, just part of being a parent is helping your kids identify when they're wrong, when they're off, and correcting it and getting back on the right path. So whether that's a piece of information and they're simply incorrect, or whether it's an action or behavior or even philosophy, a way of thinking that's just off, we got to catch our kids in the wrong and correct them so they don't think, because no one ever thinks that they're wrong when they're wrong. They think they're right. What does it feel like to be wrong? It feels like to be right. So we help our kids go, hey, no, you're off here, you're wrong here. We catch them, but we also need to catch ourselves in the wrong. Now, if I was to back up and just take a big look at parenting, hopefully catch your kids doing things right more than you catch them doing things wrong. We want to encourage that good behavior. Positive reinforcement of the good is so much more powerful than negative reinforcement of the bad. But it is important to, we just don't let our kids get away with bad stuff. There's some therapy practices that maybe for a time you ignore certain bad behaviors in therapeutic process, but you never let your kid be wrong and think they're right and just let them go on about life. I mean, that's setting them up for failure. We don't want that. So we catch our kids doing things right and we catch them doing things wrong, but we also have to catch ourselves when we're right and when we're wrong. And it's modeling ownership. And so when the kid can see dad say, hey, I was wrong, I owned it, I admit it, and maybe there might even be some forgiveness needing. Hey, can you forgive me if it was like a wrong against a person? Or maybe it's just a self-correction. Hey, I was wrong. Here's the right answer. Here's the right thing. Or I was wrong and you were right. I apologize. That creates an environment of humility, but it also creates an environment of grace and honesty. And here's why. Whenever a father or a man is not willing to admit he's wrong, he's painting that expectation for the culture and environment that he's in. So if it's not okay to admit you're wrong, then what happens when we are wrong? And people in that environment, they try to mask, hide, cover up their own wrongdoings, and that leads to dishonesty. Because to cover that up, you're going to have to lie, you're going to have to go around the truth, pretend the real thing that happened didn't happen, right? You're going to try to distort reality and make some imaginary reality, and that's just crazy. It may even be the definition of crazy. But when you can admit you're wrong, now your family can admit they're wrong, your children can admit they're wrong. Now there's room for grace. And that leads to the honesty, so the kid can come knowing, hey, Dad, you have modeled for me what it's like to admit when you're wrong, so I'm going to admit when I'm wrong. There's honesty because a child doesn't have to hide their mistakes because they know it's okay to admit that they're wrong. And there's this big difference between confessing and getting caught. When you admit you're wrong, you're confessing. When you're trying to cover up your wrong, but it gets found out, you're being caught. So confession is better than being caught. Now, I'll get into a little more of the confession later, but when this idea of grace and honesty, when we create that environment, now people, like we're laying down their pride and they're like, you know what, you're right, I was wrong. I shouldn't have made that bet, or I shouldn't have done the thing. And it just builds that culture of humility. It also builds a culture of forgiveness. So when people are admitting they're wrong, being able to say, you know what, you were wrong, I still love you. You were wrong, I forgive you. My love for you is unconditional. You were wrong, but my love for you doesn't depend on you being right. I love you regardless, but thank you for being able to admit you're wrong. And when we do the same thing, our kids will forgive us and give us grace too. And that's the type of family environment that you want. Now, here's the other big thing that happens when we admit that when we're wrong. The admission of wrong kills the narcissist. Now, we could do a whole episode on this term that gets thrown around, the narcissist, and how we hate the narcissist. And, it's like the ultimate insult to call someone a narcissist. The reality is the narcissist okay, let me back up. The narcissist is not willing to admit when they're wrong. They might be even so disillusioned that they don't believe they're ever wrong. So they've just completely lost touch with reality. But when you can admit you're wrong, it's like you're taking the narcissistic part of yourself and just stabbing a knife through it, and you're killing it. And it's a little painful. Killing our pride is painful. But when we kill the narcissist, the humble warrior gets to come out, the learner gets to come out, and the better man gets to develop because the narcissist isn't holding us back. So you want to kill the narcissist within you. And one of the ways we do that is by admitting we're wrong. And not a humble or a fake admission to wrong, not like the humble brag, like, oh, I was wrong. I admit it. I am not narcissistic. It's a posture of the heart, not just words from the mouth. It's got to be an overflow of the heart. But man, when we do that, we kill the narcissist. And when our kids do that, when kids can admit that they're wrong, they're killing the narcissist within them, which is great parenting. Good job. Now, here's my beef with the whole narcissist terminology. Sometimes people get labeled for being a narcissist when they're really just a very driven person that strives for excellence and accuracy. So it's like, do you want someone who's always wrong and can just admit it? No, that's a failure or a loser of a person. But you certainly don't want someone who is wrong and isn't willing to admit it. That's the narcissist. You want someone who strives for excellence, is driven, and who's still human and makes mistakes, and then at that point they admit they're wrong. That's the intentional father. That's what we want. So let's kill the narcissist, be intentional fathers, And then finally, let's dive into the art of confession. When we admit we're wrong, we're practicing the art of confession. It's way different than admitting we're wrong after we get caught. Confession is better than being caught. When you're caught, you either never admitted you're wrong or you try to cover it up and you got found out. And I don't think confession really counts after you've been caught. Hey, I got caught. Okay, well, I'm going to fess up now. I mean, it's better than continuing on with the lie that you didn't do the wrong thing or you weren't wrong in the first place. But it's still not as good as being the one to initiate the confession of admitting you're wrong. When you can initiate that confession, hey, I was wrong. Man, confession is the first step to life change. I'm going to say that again. You should write that down. Confession is the first step to life change. If you want a better life, if you want a new life, it starts with a confession, admitting where you're wrong. And it's okay to be wrong. We make mistakes. Confess it, own it, be the one to initiate that confession, and you're going to have a beautiful, peaceful life, and you're going to experience real life change because we're taking the person who was wrong, and it's kind of like the narcissist. We're just putting a knife through them and killing them and say, I'm not going to be that guy. I was wrong. I confess it. I admit it. And now that's leading to life change because what's the implication? I'm not going to do that wrong thing. I'm not going to believe that wrong thing. I'm not going to say the wrong thing. I'm going to behave differently and appropriately on this newfound information that I was wrong. So I own it. We're becoming a better man when we do that. That's why it's so important to admit when you're wrong. So I know this episode's hard on the pride, hard on the ego, but I hope it's so valuable because it's going to make you a better man. So maybe this is a reminder. You know what? I've kind of let it slip. I've caught myself being wrong, but I haven't actually said it out loud, and I need to go back and say it to my kids. I made a bet with my son that a certain car I was convinced it was a Kia. He was convinced it was a Hyundai. I bet him $20. It was a Kia. We got to our person's house where the car was. It wasn't a Kia. I owed him $20. It actually wasn't a Hyundai either. It was a Honda. But I made him the bet it was a Kia. I mean, so there's a very obvious way where I was wrong. The point of this podcast episode today is deeper than that. There was a time when I was not practicing what I was preaching. I was actually venting a little bit, not speaking the best about my ex-wife in front of my kids. I was venting. We were all venting, but I had to go back and I initiated this. I said, guys, I was venting. That was not right of me. That was wrong of me. I'm going to stop doing that. And I hope you can forgive me. And man, they received that and they're like, oh, Dad's apologizing to us. Wow. It just changed the dynamic of our family. It changed even the feeling in the room. And it's so good. It's so good, but yet especially men, we have trouble. We have this fear of admitting when we're wrong, that we're going to be rejected. And it's just not the case. It's the exact opposite. People accept us more when we admit that we're wrong. And so that's the heart behind today's episode. So, man, admit when you're wrong. Own it. Model it for your kids. Create that culture and that safe environment for honesty and grace. Kill the narcissist. And practice the art of confession. That begins in the family. It'll transform your family and it'll transform our society and culture. It all stems from the family. So I hope this has been of great value to you. I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments. So leave some comments. Make sure to like and subscribe and all that stuff. But God bless you in your fatherhood efforts. I'll catch you on the next episode.